Have you ever had this thing where you're searching for something, in this case, a very particular set of war games rules, and you look in every folder, you look in every drawer, you look in all your boxes in the shed, you go online, you search the internet, you look on eBay, you go through all the war games forums, nothing. So you kind of think, oh, well, that's that. I'm never going to see those rules again. Then suddenly out of the blue, they just sort of drop into your lap as if by divine providence. Well, that's what happened to me recently, and today on Dragon's Teeth, we're looking at Firefly WW2 1/300th War Games rules. Hi, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today on Dragon's Teeth. So, yes, we're back to World War II. Welcome back to the World War II playlist. I know it's been quite a while. I think possibly the last thing I posted here was a game of Achtung Panzer, maybe. So I've not really been doing any World War II for quite some time. However, that is one of my major areas of interest. And I'm sure I've mentioned before, it was really the first period I got into when I started wargaming proper, tabletop wargaming, 1/72 scale World War II, Airfix, Matchbox, all the rest of it. I think we started with the WRG rules, mostly playing sort of platoon level actions in Normandy, 3 or 4 tanks per side, that sort of thing. However, we wanted to expand things out a bit, and to do that, well, first of all, we looked east to the Eastern Front, because at that time, we're talking late 70s, of course, we were all reading dubious books such as Sven Hassel, Leo Kessler, all that kind of stuff. Then, of course, we had Cross of Iron from the Willy Heinrich book. Was it Guy Sager, I think, The Forgotten Soldier? So the Eastern Front was of great interest as well. And one noticeable thing about the Eastern Front, of course, or at least part of it, was the huge scale of some of those battles, leading all the way up to actions like Kursk. So that's what we wanted to do. Bit difficult in 1/72 or 20mm or 25mm. At the time, however, we had Heroics and Ross producing 1/300th scale tanks. Perfect. So we started taking trips down to New Model Army in Manor Park, who stocks Heroics and Ross, Nav War and all sorts of great things. And we started building our German and Soviet forces. And now that same 6x4 table was transformed from a fight over a village crossroads and a bridge or something like that into much larger engagements. I think the first set of rules we were using were called something like Battles with Micro Tanks. I still have a copy of those. They had a blue cover. They were okay. They were pretty good. They certainly worked and got us going. But eventually, the rule set that we came to really use a lot and really enjoyed was a set called Firefly. Nothing to do with the later science fiction program, of course, which, by the way, was great. Why they cancelled it, we shall never know. But this was Firefly, and it was billed as a challenging war game set in World War II. And of course, as with so many things, as I moved about, particularly when I moved out of London, a lot of things went in boxes, a lot of things disappeared, who knows where they went. When I got back into gaming, and particularly when I wanted to start doing 1/300th again, I looked around for my Firefly rules, couldn't find them. Okay, I'll go online. Difficult. There were some on eBay, there were some in America, but of course you're paying like $40 for the rules and $20 for the postage, all this sort of thing. In the absence of the Firefly rules, I had those old Micro Tanks rules, and I started digging around. I started buying other sets of rules. Mein Panzer, Blitzkrieg Commander, I think, and a few others. All very good, but none of them really scratched that same itch that Firefly had. I thought, well, maybe I'll come to that again in the future. Firefly, never going to see him again. Until last Sunday. I was in Peterborough for the Hereward 25 show, which was a great event organised by the Peterborough War Games group, and I had a table there this time, so I was selling off some of my old books, some of my old rules. chap came up, and I still don't know his name, even though we've spoken a few times now. I'm terrible with names anyway, so I do apologise. And he wanted to buy a set of rules. I had fantasy rules called Hordes of the Things. We got chatting, and I just happened to mention about 1/300th rules. He said that was something he'd been into, and I mentioned Firefly, and he uttered those wonderful words, "Oh, I've got 4 copies of those. Do you want to do a swap?" Yes. So, effectively, we swapped the Hordes of the Things rules for a copy of Firefly. Of course, he didn't have those on him, but we met up a couple of days later and did the transaction in the car park in Bedford. All very shady. Anyway, the upshot is that I am now the proud possessor of not only a set of Firefly rules, but these also come with the original counters and the reference sheets as well. So everything is here. They are in excellent condition, pretty much mint condition. So I was very pleased with that. What I'm going to do today then is just take a quick look through these, see if they are as good as I remembered them, kind of thing, and also just take you through some of the mechanics, because these are quite involved. These are your old school rules. To be honest, this is the stuff I like. Sort of card covers. It almost looks like it's been photocopied, and there's just tons and tons of tables in here. But we'll get on to all of that. First, let's just give a quick mention to the author. The rules were written by a chap called Bruce ReaTaylor, and they are published by Tabletop Games, which I believe was run by Andy Ashton. These were published in 1987, a lot later than I remember, actually. In my mind, we were playing these in the early 80s, but that shows how the memory can play tricks, right? Now, I've done some research into both of those gentlemen, and there's not a lot of information around. One thing I did find was that, sadly, Bruce ReaTaylor passed away in 1988 at the age of 40. Very unfortunate. And Andy Ashton passed away in 2004, I believe. And I can't find out a lot about either of them. We do know that Bruce ReaTaylor authored a set of Challenger rules for like Cold War games, again 1/300s I think, and quite a lot of supplements and other rule sets around those, including skirmish rules, and also something called Corps Commander World War II, which was 1/300th, but used the quite novel at the time idea of one model represented a company, rather than in Firefly, one model represents one tank. So these allowed you to play even larger scale games. I think Firefly represented, if you like, the pinnacle of war games rules at that time. Now, some people may not agree, and one thing you often hear about this rule set in particular is that they are overly complex, which I can sympathise with, but then again, my favourite board game is Starfleet Battles. So the complexity is not an issue to me if the game flows well and if it is all very logical. If I can make sense of it in my head, then I can live with the complexity. I don't honestly think these are that complex, but I realise they may be in the context of some more modern games where I don't want to criticise really, but you know, it's a good thing to get new people into the hobby. But I do feel in some aspects, modern rules have been simplified quite a lot, perhaps to the detriment to me of that layer of richness and complexity. But anyway, that's all down to personal taste. And if it gets new and younger players into the hobby, then that's a good thing. So what we're going to do now is run through the rules. I'm not going to do an in-depth analysis, but just give you an idea of the turn sequence, some of the rules for spotting, for movement, for direct and indirect fire, and really one of the highlights of these rules for me is the organisational charts at the back, because one thing that appealed to me about 1/300th is you can build up your camp group, your companies, your battalions, your regiments, and so on, and you can fit them all into a box this big. Right? In fact, I'll show you some of my 1/300 stuff before we finish as well. Some of it's painted, a lot of it has remained unpainted for quite a long time. So hopefully these rules will spur me to get those finished and on the table. Here we are then, Firefly, a challenging game of World War II for 1/300th and 1/200th battle group actions by B.A. ReaTaylor. So as I said, these are old school rules. So in terms of presentation, they're fairly basic, and you know, there's lots of dense print, not so many illustrations, but that's how rules used to be. We start with the contents, and I think as you can see there, you already start to get an idea of the depth and scope of these rules. Copyright Tabletop Games, March 1987, and there's that address I mentioned in Birkenhead. And as I also mentioned, these rules are based on the popular modern set Challenger and examine in detail armoured actions during the Second World War. So we've got a little introduction, and there's a thanks here about, I would like to thank the members of the Wallasey Immortals for their helpful suggestions and play testing of these rules. I don't know if the Wallasey Immortals are still going. I presume that's a wargame club. So let's get into it, and we start as so many old school rules did, with ground scales. 1 centimetre equals 20 metres, or 1 inch equals 50 metres. The time scale is 1 move equals 2 minutes. For campaign purposes, it is suggested that 1 move equals 10 minutes. Figure scale. Vehicles and heavy weapons are represented by single models. Infantry is represented by sections, which the way we normally used to do that was 3 or 4 figures on a base. So the base is about 25 by 30 mil wide and about 50 to 20 mil deep. And this is one thing I was looking for in 1/300th rules, was that one model on the table represents one vehicle. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just me. I'm not keen on rules where 1 tank on the table equals 3 tanks. I don't know. It doesn't feel the same to me. Perhaps that's because I come from that more sort of a 20 mil small action skirmish background, perhaps. Anyway, this is D20. We're on to the game requirements next, which is probably fairly newish at the time. We're not quite into percentage dice, but we do have D20 and D10, which I think D&D pretty much brought in. I can't think of any rule sets that had D20s or D10s prior to D&D. You need some markers. The playing area should be at least 6 by 4, so your standard wargame size table, and it mentions a little bit about terrain there. You'll notice all the paragraphs are numbered as well, 4.1, 4.1.1, 1.2, etc. Very similar to Starfleet battles, and I think then when it comes to rules revisions or looking for something, it makes it very easy to find stuff. So although we have this quite dense text throughout, everything is numbered and is quite easy to find, particularly with that contents table at the start. So we have that page there on pre-game reconnaissance that talks about radio intercepts, ground and air reconnaissance. Then we're into the main thing really, the sequence of play. So I'll just take you through this. Both players request or note the arrival of aircraft. Okay. Both players request and plot indirect fire and carry out any other communication between units. Both players declare any units on anti-aircraft overwatch. Both players resolve any indirect fire plotted to arrive this turn. So the very start is basically your air stuff and your off-table artillery. Well, I suppose they can be on-table, but still indirect. Then we get into our phases. So this is a little bit unusual. First player moves any or all of his units as required. Second player fires any unit that did not move more than half a move in its last movement phase. First player fires any unit that did not move more than half a move. Then the second player moves any or all of his units as required. Then we're repeating. The first player fires any unit that did not move more than half a move in its previous phase. Then the second player fires any unit that did not move more than half a move in the previous phase. Now, that might sound quite complicated, but I remember in practice, you soon get used to that. The main thing is you have to sort of keep track of units that moved more than half a move, which you know, I suppose depending what size game you're playing, we found pretty straightforward. You can always use a counter or something to mark anything that went over half. This is when we start talking about realism in rules, which is another huge subject in itself. This is one of the myths, I think, of the Second World War that we see a lot in the movies, perhaps, or certainly the older movies. Tanks firing on the move. Your chances of hitting anything in a World War II tank firing on the move are pretty negligible. So most tanks would stop or at least slow down to fire. So it's nice to see that in this. Any unit that is going more than half its move is going to have trouble firing if it can fire at all. Anyway, then we get our end of move phases. We're back to our aircraft and AA fire again. We get morale tests and we get suppression, dispersion and neutralization. Because of course units under fire may become suppressed, may disperse and so on. So that's our basic sequence of play. Now we also have orders as well. This is something else I remember from this game. A lot of the previous game we played, there was no orders. You just kind of reacted as you went along. But here, all units must be given orders, otherwise they will not move and fire unless fired at. So you can give general orders from your battle group and battalion HQs. You can give companies and independent platoons tactical orders. I'm not going to go through all those here, but it's a pretty thorough list of all the type of orders. Tactical, movement, action, artillery orders. So these are all sort of built into the game as well, which again starts to give you that idea of command and control rather than everything just moving around as it feels like. And speaking of that, then we get quite a chunk here on that command and control. So this really lays out the command structure and how units generally, to maintain their cohesion, have to remain within the radius given below from its next highest command level, depending on the type of game being played. If there's a loss of command control, then various things can happen. Of course, we have communication as well with radio and telephones and everything else. But as we also know from World War II, they weren't always the most reliable and telephone lines could be broken. We get into movement, and this is all pretty standard stuff. Everything from horses up to trucks and your vehicles have movement rates. They will be modified by the type of terrain, poor going, heavy going, severe weather, road, etc., etc. We also get rates for towing vehicles, because if you're towing a heavy gun behind, that's going to slow you down. We also get rates, this is how detailed these are, for infantry sections entering or leaving the vehicles. So if you want to disgorge your Panzer Grenadiers from your Hanomags, then, you know, there's a movement cost for that as well. We also have setting up times, because it's one thing to get your anti-tank gun to the table, to the front line, it's another thing to set it up. So again, quite a nice lot of detail here. And they're not things that you're necessarily going to use because they may not even factor into a game. But if you do need them, they are there. We have a page on visibility, which is all pretty much what you'd expect. Again, affected by the weather conditions, affected by different types of terrain. And this brings us on to our firing and acquisition. You need to see something to fire at it. I mean, indirect fire from the artillery, of course, is a slightly different matter. So there's a simple table here, and it's a dice roll with various modifiers to see if you can actually see your target. That brings us into the direct fire rules. Now, again, it looks like a lot of stuff here, a lot of text, but really once you get into it, you're basically looking at the direct fire table, you're checking the caliber of your gun, you're looking at the range, and it gives you a number. And we're rolling D20s, remember. It's pretty much straightforward. You've got the sort of modifiers you'd usually expect. And of course, when it comes to firing on tanks in particular, we want to be very specific about what angle we're hitting it at, front, side, or rear. So we have that built in as well. This includes not only fire from tanks to tanks, but also cannons and heavy machine guns, infantry anti-tank weapons, plus your usual anti-tank guns, your 6-pounders, your Pak 40s and all that kind of thing. We also have something called direct area fire. This is infantry vehicles, guns and howitzers firing over open sites to fire at infantry, soft-skin vehicles, constructions, field defences and so on. So I guess that's basically your high explosive type stuff, or your infantry units firing with rifles, machine guns and so on. For that we have an infantry fire number table, and again it's the same sort of process. You've got your basic to hit number, then you've got your modifiers. Included in that is also infantry close assault because, you know, clearing out bunkers, trenches and so on. Units have to close, so we've got rules for that. We've got infantry fire at armoured vehicles, results of the hits, and then this idea of suppressive fire I kind of touched on earlier, which is really to make a suspected enemy keep his head down, draw his fire, or for the support of an assault into a position. So a kind of standard tactic, if you've got an infantry section going in, then their fellow section is likely to lay down suppressive fire to allow them to reach the enemy positions. The next section is that indirect fire we've mentioned before. So that's possibly your on-table, but more often not your off-table artillery and rocket batteries. And we have all the rules you'd expect for that. Everything from mortars up to your Stalin organ Katyusha rockets. This is where we get, this was a standard for the old rules as well, your deviation, where, you know, you want to plonk your artillery directly on a trench line, but of course, things being what they are, it might go short, it might go left, it might go right, it might go long. So that is all built in. And there we have the area fire table, which gives us various results, including suppressed, destroyed, dispersed, and so on. Guns don't just fire explosives, of course, they can also fire smoke. So there we have the section on smoke, even down to smoke grenades from infantry sections. There's a page on night fighting. Obviously, target acquisition is going to be somewhat different from that, but that's where we get into moonlight, flares, searchlights, and the like. And then we have our morale rules. This is all pretty much as normal. It gives the circumstances under which morale check needs to be made, and your various results go from OK to half move all the way through to what's called retire from action at maximum speed. In other words, run away. And then we get into a section on aircraft. This is not something we really went into that much. I think a couple of times we use aircraft. I do remember doing parachute drops, which I think involved dropping bits of paper from about a foot above the table, which was quite fun. But should you want to put in sort of ground attack aircraft, then you have all the rules for that there as well. And that goes through into airborne operations. So there's those parachute landings I was talking about. And we also have a section on glider landings as well. Following that, we have engineering and mines. We also have rules for making bridges, for assault boats, so river crossings. Again, you can get a good scenario about forcing a river crossing and mine clearing. And again, the depth of detail even goes down to booby traps and demolitions and bridge destruction as well. So I don't know, it just feels to me they've got pretty much every aspect covered. There's a section on 1/200th scale, should you want to move to that. I think there were some 1/200th manufacturers, Skytrex possibly. Not something we ever use, we always stuck with 1/300th. That really then is the core of the actual rules, but the back half of the book is really something else that appealed to me. There's a mine of information here, if you'll excuse the pun. First of all, we get into points values. Not something we particularly used a lot, not something I like to use much now, to be honest, but they're there if you want to set up a points versus points sort of even-sided battle. And then we come into, this is the sort of stuff that I do like to see in World War II rules. Several tables for the penetration values of the various guns. So we start with the American 37mm L53, and we're going all the way through to what you'd expect, the British, the Czech, the French, Italian, very comprehensive. The Germans were up to the 88s, of course, the 128, the Russians, and then some other miscellaneous as well. So very comprehensive. And added to that, we also get the stats for the different types of ammunition these guns might be firing as well. Could be APC, could be HE, and so on. So there we get their HE values, I guess these are. And then we're into the vehicle data. So again, lovely set of tables here that covers, well, I don't suppose it covers absolutely everything, but it covers pretty much everything you're going to need, I think. We start with the Americans. We go from light tanks, from your Stuarts and your Chaffees, through to your mediums, your various models of Shermans, up to the Pershing, half-tracks and everything else. So we've got the armour values for front, side and rear. We've got the target size for acquisition. We've got the speed for movement. And we've got the armament of each vehicle, or AFV. We've got the year of service that it came in. Obviously, you want to stick to realistic years. Well, I guess. I mean, you can do what you want, really. And then we have the points value as well. So this was a great section of the book for us. And, of course, it goes through all the other forces as well. British, German, Japanese, Italian, Czech, and so on. We get similar stats for all the soft skin vehicles. And then, just going back to those aircraft rules, we get all the stats for the most common type of ground attack aircraft. So that's part one. That's, you know, the rules themselves. And then part two is really another very useful thing we've found. We have army lists. Again, looking back, I'm just surprised how comprehensive these were for the time. We go from the Blitzkrieg 1939, from the Polish Mechanized Cavalry Brigade, all the way through to the final years. We've got a Russian Guards Heavy Tank Brigade, presumably coming into Berlin, even a Polish Tank Corps in 1945. So if we just flick through one of these, let's have a look, just take something at random. German Panzer Kampfgruppe, Eastern Front 1943. So this is the makeup of your Kampfgruppe. It's a 1942 list with the following amendments. And it just goes into great detail on the sort of artillery we have, how many tank companies, what sort of tanks they'd have, what the command units would be. So as I said, with this sort of information with 1/300 scale, this now becomes your shopping list, right? You take this down to the shop, which we used to do, or occasionally mail order. Nowadays you order online. You can see exactly what we need. 4 medium tank companies, each with 3 platoons of 3 T-34-76s, 3 SMG companies, etc., etc., etc. So if you want to have your own Russian tank course from 1943 in 1/300, there it is. Of course, you can split that up into your various subunits as well. So very useful for putting together scenarios and particularly for developing campaigns as well, which we did a little bit of. Personally, I do like a campaign because I enjoy that narrative aspect of any war game. So maybe that's something to think about in the future. And we finish up with an example of an order and equipment sheet. So that basically lists all your units, your vehicle types. You can put all your stats in there for quick reference. And of course, that's where you can put in your orders as well. We've got a blank one there that you can photocopy. And I mentioned the counters as well. Let me just show you those. So yeah, look at that pristine counter sheet. I might use these, or I might just use some coloured counters instead to save cutting these out. I'd probably like to keep those as they are. And these are just markers for you: disperse, suppress, neutralise, smoke, so on and so on. I guess for smoke we're probably going to use some cotton wool kind of thing. There's some amendments and clarifications here as well, because I know what it's like. I've just produced a set of rules myself, my fantasy skirmish rules, and whatever you put in, you miss something out, or you look back and think, oh, actually, no, I need to explain that a bit better. So you have the option of going back and redoing that bit, which potentially, especially in this format, is going to knock all your print down a couple of lines and you've got to change. Or much easier just to put an amendment or clarification at the back. And just to finish, we have 2 quick reference sheets which cover everything you'd expect. And again, even just looking at those, you can see the amount of detail, I think. But as I said, once you get into the game, like most things, Same with Starfleet battles. Once you get into it, you know what's what. We always found these to be pretty fast moving, and we didn't really have any problems. After a while, of course, you get to kind of learn that, you know, a 75mm whatever is going to only be effective at a certain range and all the rest of it. So you're not looking stuff up all the time. There's a quick overview of the rules then. I would like to get a game of this set up sometime just to run through. I might set something up in the Dragon's Lair here and film it just to see the game in action, so to speak. I did mention a website earlier that has some amendments and additions to the rules. This is called Firefly Outgunned, and I'll put the link down below. I've not had a good look at it yet, but it looks like someone has gone through the rules and just amended a few things, clarified a few things, perhaps updated a few things. The only difficulty is these are put up on a very old style website, so the text is basically on the web page. There's no PDF or text file you can download as one file. However, I am going to go through, if I can cut and paste all that text into a document file or something, then I'll see if I can get a decent printout. If I can do that, then I might put that up as a download. And again, I'll let you know about that and send out the link. So I just want to finish by showing you my 1/300th stuff, as I said, that I've currently got. German and Soviet. The sort of time period we went for when we used to play was about 1943 into 44, perhaps into 45 a little. I did buy some buildings recently as well. I think these were from Pendragon Miniatures, so I'll put their link up below. They do a really nice range of 1/300th buildings. And as I said at the start, it's so unfortunate that the author, Bruce ReaTaylor, died at such a young age, 40, very shortly after these rules came out. So I presume never really got to see that they were played and enjoyed by people. And I think we can honour his memory in no better way than by continuing to use his rules and continuing to enjoy and to play Firefly. All right, that's it for today. Thanks very much for joining me. As always, if you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe. I'm delighted to announce that we're almost up to 500 subscribers. So if we could hit that benchmark this month, that would be excellent. I'd be really pleased with that. As every YouTube creator says, the best thing you can do is hit the like and subscribe button. It really does help us to grow channels. It really does help us to keep things moving along. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.